Alright, anyone out there in Banjo land, Mike Hedding here. I had a request from someone out in the audience if I could do a lesson on decreasing your dependence on the tab, on having the tab in front of you at all times. This student didn't feel very comfortable playing without a tab in front of them. So I want to give you some of the tips that I use, maybe some analogies and things that I think of that have helped me, and hopefully this can get you to practice with and without a tab, because learning to read tab is super important, but learning to play by ear and play without tab is also super important. So let's jump into this lesson. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is why is it important to learn to read tab? And why is it important to learn to play by ear? Because some schools, teachers swear by, not using any tab whatsoever. They want you to learn completely by ear. And while I kind of understand what they're going for that, I strongly recommend using both. My analogy is, imagine if you were learning a new language. Let's say you were trying to learn how to speak Spanish or French or English, whatever it is. Learning to play by ear is basically learning to speak, and learning to read and play tab is kind of like learning to read the language. So obviously both are very important. If you can only speak the language or recite things that you've heard, you go to a new country and you're trying to use that new language, you're going to have trouble reading signs, ordering something off a menu. You need to be able to read and interpret the language through reading it as well as hearing it. So it's super important to be able to learn to read tab as well. So I'm not advocating for never using tab, but then on the other end of the spectrum, it is easy to always be reliant on the tab, to never feel comfortable playing by ear. And that's what we're going to talk about in this lesson. So the first thing I want you to ask yourself is, how much time do you actually spend playing without the tab in front of you, right? Because if you only practice 5% of the time without the tabs, or 0% of the time without the tabs, you're probably going to have a lot of trouble playing without a tab because you just haven't practiced it. So the first thing I would say is, if you want to get better at playing without a tab, is just literally increase your time playing without the tab in front of you. Force yourself to do it. It's going to be a struggle at first, but just like learning to read tab and play along with tab, it's a skill, so you have to practice it. And the more you kind of throw yourself into the pool and start swimming, just literally flip the tab over, force yourself to play something without it. No matter, you might need to take a few steps back in your playing ability while you're not reading the tab, but that's all part of the process, okay? Okay, so the second thing I want to talk about with getting off a tab is kind of forgetting the finer details and getting a broader picture of the song. So think of the song like a story, or maybe a speech you're giving. If you were giving a speech at your work or at school or whatever, would you try and memorize every single word, or would you try and memorize a few broad concepts that you want to hit on and then trust your ability to fill in the gaps? Because it's not going to be realistic to memorize, maybe you can memorize one tab completely, but can you memorize 10? Can you memorize 50? Can you memorize 100? I know I can't. So for me, what I do is, rather than trying to memorize a tab, because I was thinking about it before I recorded this lesson, I don't really think I have any tab completely memorized, and I've written up hundreds of tabs, and I don't have any of them memorized. I do have certain licks memorized, I have certain concepts memorized, but I don't have a complete tab of really any song memorized. So the second thing I would kind of say is, maybe decrease your reliance on, or set a different goal, basically, rather than trying to memorize a tab and playing it that exact same way over and over again. Because what happens if you do that is, if you hit an index finger instead of a thumb, or you can't remember one little part, since you don't have a broader framework of the song, of those bigger picture concepts, you get stuck and you get lost in the kind of the minutia of the tab. You can't remember if was it a slide? Was it a hammer-on? When in reality, those little details don't make a huge difference in bringing the song across, or, playing the song. So the second thing I would say is, don't get caught up in the finer details at first. You can memorize a certain lick here or there and get it exactly right if you want to. But I think people that struggle with playing without a tab is if you ask them to play a very simple version of the song they were working on, they would struggle to do that. They might be able to play, a kind of an advanced or intermediate level tab from memory, but if you ask them, hey, just play a simple version of the song, could you do that? So let's take a song like Cripple Creek, and, let's say I try and memorize, memorize that little tab, So first thing I would do is play a super simple version of it. So maybe I go, something like that maybe, right? So first thing I would do is get an understanding of the chords, right? So we're going G, 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 C, C, G, 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 D, G. So, again, those are the broad spots in the tab that I need to hit, right? I need to play the chords for the song to sound like Cripple Creek, right? So first, that would be the first thing I would get down. And then maybe I do, or maybe I can't remember that part. Maybe I can't remember that ending lick. Maybe this is all I can remember. Maybe I go, because another concept that I use a lot is you don't want to get caught up. And this, again, goes back to our analogy of language. They always say, like when you're learning a new language, if you can't remember a particular vocabulary word, in this case a lick, substitute it with a different vocabulary word you do know, even if it doesn't make quite as much sense, right? So, but it'll still get the point across. The person that's listening will understand what you're trying to say, rather than getting caught up in, I don't know that one word, so I'm just, I can't, I'm not even going to say it, right? So, maybe I can't remember, like that's the lick I can't remember, right? So maybe I go, maybe I just do, maybe I just fill it with a pinch. And that's where understanding the chords becomes super important, right? So, or maybe I can't remember the opening line, so I go, maybe I can't remember that C lick, so I fill that C with something else. So, I think having an understanding of the song itself, and that's where listening becomes super, super important. If you're trying to play a song that you never heard, don't really care about, you can't hum it in your head or sing the lyrics, it's going to be so much harder to play without the tab, because the tab is your only connection to that song, right? So, go find 10 versions of Cripple Creek and listen to them. Get it in your head to where you can fill in that next spot in your mind. Even if you don't know exactly what the person is playing, you'll have a general sense of the melody, the timing, the rhythm of the song, which is so much more important than, again, the finer details of, did you do thumb, index, thumb, middle, or a forward reverse roll? Since I know this song, I'm hitting those checkpoints to where it still sounds like the song, even though I'm not playing, quote unquote, what I memorized, right? So maybe I just play a lick. So that would be another thing that I would say is, don't get caught up in the finer details. If you have to fill the space with a pinch, with another lick that take something that you do know and just crowbar it in there. Even if it's not perfect, it's not perfect, but you're working on filling in that space, and then that's the spot where you need to go back and listen to it and just drill that part in your mind more, so you hear the timing, the phrasing in your head before you're trying to play it. Because, again, imagine if you were trying to tell a story and you weren't sure of like the ending to the story, right? It's going to be hard to, on the fly, come up with something. So, trust yourself to fill in the details, but have a strong understanding of the broader concept of the song. Where does it go up in pitch? Where does it go down in pitch? And then trust your right hand and your left hand to kind of fill in the details, okay? Okay, so let's look at another song real quick. Let's take the old classic Long Journey Home. So first, let's start by learning the basic melody. That's why it's so important to know the basic melody. Even if you're an advanced player, you have to know how to play the song simply, because that's where that's your lifeline if you can't remember a certain phrase in real time, right? Because if you can't do that, right, how are you gonna, you might be able to memorize a version of it, but if you ever forget a little phrase, you're not gonna know what to go back to. You're not gonna know how to fill in those certain spots, right? So let's look at, so even a phrase like that, right? So I could do it that way. I could do it with a forward verse roll like that. I could do it with, or maybe I just do a lick, like I said. Right there, I put in a little lick that I've memorized, right? I got a little further away from the melody there, but I just put in a lick, right? So, and I think this is one of the things that's the hardest for adult students to do, is just play something, even if they, that kind of signal in your brain is going off and saying, hey, you don't know what to play here. But you just got to play something, even if you stray away from the melody. So maybe I'll play a version where I get totally off, right? Part of the tab I can remember, right? So that's all I can remember. And I go, and then I know there's a C. And then a D. So obviously a little further away from Long Journey Home, but it will work to get you started, right? Because if you set the goal of either playing a perfect solo to Long Journey Home or playing nothing, that gap between the two is going to be very hard to bridge, right? So start by playing licks that you've memorized, and then as you get better, as you know the song better, I know this song very well. I've heard it 1,000 times. I've played it on a bunch of different instruments, so I'm not making up a version on the spot, but because I know the song so well. So I think the biggest thing to getting off tab is really about understanding and listening to the song and knowing it really well. You need to hear those lyrics in your head. If you're not hearing, lost all my money but a $2 bill, $2 bill, it just says that over and over again. But, you really need to be hearing what you're about to play or what the next phrase is, Otherwise, you're just going to be stuck. It's going to be so easy to get lost in the song because you're just you don't know the song that well, and that's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with taking the tab of a song you never heard and playing it, but you can't expect to be able to take the tab and flip it over if you don't know the song, if you don't have a concept of how the song goes. You know, can you hum it? Can you think of your favorite version? You know, I can think of a bunch of versions of Long Journey Home that I really like. So, you know, that would be another thing I would say is, if you're really struggling to memorize something, you got to listen to it more. That was something my mandolin teacher taught me. You know, he would listen to songs over and over again, the same song, just over and over again, you know, 1,000 times or whatever it took him, and just so many more times than I thought was quote unquote necessary. But he just knew the song so deeply because he had just listened to it so many times that naturally it just came out in his playing because he had done the homework. And it's not about memorizing it, it's about just listening to it so many times where you just know this song. So, you know, again, you can kind of memorize the tab, but that's not going to be practical for that many songs. And especially when you go to a real life jam session, there's all this, you know, external stimulus going on of other people playing, you know, people talking to you. It's just going to be that much harder to memorize the tab. And lastly, you know, I think the last thing is just, like I said at the beginning, kind of forcing yourself to do it. I know for me, whenever I have the tab in front of me, some signal in my brain just goes off that says you don't need to fully memorize this. You don't need to fully learn this song until you flip the tab over, you know, put it away for a while, try and play the song, try and fill in the gaps that you don't know. Again, like I said, even if it doesn't make perfect sense with the song, you have to fill in the gaps to start. Then you can go back and say, okay, here are the two licks in this song, in this tab that I want to memorize, you know, here and here, because those are the spots when I'm playing the song without the tab that I get stuck every time. Because then that gives you a spot, to like an actual practical space. Okay, I can memorize 2 licks. That's another thing I found is that, you know, rather than focusing on memorizing the entire piece of music, focus on memorizing maybe 1 or 2 or 3 little points in the song where you get stuck, you know, because maybe it's the ending lick. You know, maybe that's the spot that I get stuck every time. So, you know, one thing is you could try and memorize that one little section. The other thing you could do is just loop that section over and over again. You know, the I'm on my long journey home part, you know. Not all of them are exactly like it, but I'm just practicing coming up with something and filling that space until I get, you know, a version that I really like. And it's not about memorizing it, it's kind of about filling that space in the music and, you know, knowing what boundaries I need to hit. So I need to play a G and then a D. So hopefully that gives you a few things to try. You know, obviously this isn't going to be a process that just happens overnight. You don't go from just always playing with tabs to just playing without tabs completely, you know. So be patient with yourself, but add it to your list of skills that you really want to practice, because if you don't practice it, you're not going to get better at it. But I absolutely guarantee you with practice, you'll be able to improve on this skill. All right, hopefully that helps you out. Good luck and keep picking.